Welcome to the trans-Apocalyptic Oasis show. I am Marshall Eon, and today I'm here with Layman Pascal. Welcome, Layman.
Hey, man, great to be here. Let me take this
Yeah,
opportunity up front to let all 7 of your listeners know something very special.
there's 11 now.
11, all right. I'm officially changing my name from Layman Pascal to asshole, cunt, nigger, wop, kike, retard, ivermectin, incest, Mohammed Pascal, which I think is catchier and also does what occultists call a banishing spell for fools.
Okay, this is
How's
definitely
that?
getting banned from YouTube. I was going to mention your name, actually, because it's a homophone for lame man.
It is.
So do people ever, call you that?
You're the first, and it's making me very sad inside.
I'm sorry. But it's ironic because you're not lame, just like you're not a layman, right? Is that your real name?
Uh, it's um it's a nickname that evolved from a couple of different things. It has most of the letters of my birth name in it, but also it's a reference to the way I talk and also to a character from Zen history called Layman Pang.
I see. So we're both
Pascal
using.
thing's right on the money.
I see. We're both using fake names today.
Yeah.
I mean, my last name it's a homophone of my middle name.
Oh,
Can you guess what my middle name is?
Ian?
Exactly. How did you know?
I just got to quickly look up what homophone means.
No homo. Same sound, which I know you know, but my listeners aren't the smartest.
Bunch of homos.
Bunch of homos. So, what do we talk? Oh, yeah. So you're the host of a popular podcast. It's called Integral Predators. So tell me, how much how much do you regret interviewing Marc Gafni?
That's interesting because I feel like there's something really good on the other side of that. There's first of all, I mean, what the fuck is the use of a reputation? Let's just set them on fire.
Great, yeah,
If we're
great
not,
point, man.
if it's not disturbing, what's the
I've
point
been
of
doing
putting it
that
on
for
the air?
years,
Mark's a difficult dude to deal with sometimes. He has a very peculiar personality that
especially
can
if you're
feel,
female.
yes. And when he comes up, people have a built-in set of reactions. So you can't get around that. And yet I'm like, hey, I'm not saying Mark is Hitler, but I am saying I would interview Hitler.
Yeah, I would interview Hitler. Why not?
Yeah. So that's
But that's like top tier evil, like mid grade evil is not that interesting, you know?
our mandate is not to be interesting and stick to the top tier, right? We're trying to
What's your
do
mandate?
to
I
introduce
mean,
the whole
person
meta
date?
community to itself. Same day I talked to Mark, I think it was the same day, I talked to a guy who he's just a guy who likes integral and happens to be a cross-dresser, right? He's
Ken?
got no books, he's got no platform, it's just a guy.
Oh, so that's not Ken, the crossdresser.
No, although that was fun to see Ken in a wig and get to wear a wig with him in a wig.
Is he going to be wearing like a dress next?
Ken?
Hmm.
I hope so. If we do another
I
interview,
think
I'll
he's trying
get
to do
with
the
that.
Matrix thing, like the Wachowskis.
Doing the full transition, yeah.
Yeah,
The millennial genius transgender move.
I think we might see that happen soon. So, okay, so you don't regret that.
No, and in fact, I'd like to go farther with it.
Oh,
I'd like to do a couple
interesting.
of talks and just see how either deep and or upsetting it can become.
Right. Well, I have to say I appreciate it because um, if you weren't if you weren't open to talking with unsavory characters, you wouldn't be here today.
That's exactly right. I've heard a lot of bad things about you personally,
No,
And
it's true.
I'm willing to overlook them for the sake of conviviality.
Yeah, I just got called a hypocrite today on Facebook, which is, I still feel sad about.
You bearded hypocrite.
Yeah.
Actually, I like the beard. It's looking good.
You like that?
Yeah, I like it. It looks like you sort of shave down the sides a little and let the bottom
Yeah,
widen
I
out.
did get I
I
did
think
get
that's good.
styled
Yeah.
by a style lady person.
Uh-oh.
I'm not
We're gonna get
I'm not going to
canceled
assume
now.
her gender.
Plus, she was using ivermectin at the time.
Oh yeah. Does ivermectin change your gender or something?
I don't know. It should. I hope it does. I'd like all contemporary issues to be fused into one, just so I don't have to think as hard.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that. I mean, I'm kind of bored of talking about pandemic stuff.
All right. I don't care about the pandemic. I got vaccinated.
Um,
I can go to the movies again. I don't have a strong position on this one way or the other.
I'm in Colorado, so you don't even need anything to. Nobody cares. There's no pandemic here.
Well, everyone in every other state figures you guys are just contagious anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone here is a deplorable.
All right. So what should we talk about aside from all the nonsense we've just been talking
Well, I
about?
just have to take a moment and thank our sponsors.
Okay.
Earpy's Integral Saloon, where you're free to be a dick.
Free to be a dick. I love it. I want to hear like a couple of notes of Clint Eastwood music and then also see like a dick come in from the side of the screen for a second.
That would be your Integral Predator show.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I got the pyramids today.
Love them.
Because I want to
Not as
talk a
much as I
little.
love the Sphinx, but they're pretty good.
The Sphinxster.
The Sphinxter, man. Thousands of years older, I hear.
Oh yes, yeah. So, yeah, the Sphinxster. It predates desert Egypt. Don't they call it like pre-Sans Egypt?
Resand Egypt. Yep.
Okay,
That's a
so
big
who
term
built
in
the
the
who
Gurdjieff
built the
system.
fucking Sphinx, man?
Well, I'll tell you what Graham Hancock says.
Okay, that guy. Yeah.
He's a guy who, like, years ago, like my father and brother were into him, and I'm like, no, because I thought they meant like Zacharias St. John or like Eric von Daniken or something, just nonsense. But then I read, I'm like, oh, he's not as dumb as I thought. One of those guys. So I read through it. I'm like, okay, he's basically saying there was a civilization before the first civilization, and it coexisted with primitive people, and it was really good at astronomy and like making boats and moving large stone objects around. And whether it came from one place or a bunch of people did it, there was a time about 12,000 years ago where these people were doing it and they had some esoteric teachings. And they got smashed down by an ecological thing. And the people who survived were the primitives, and the more civilized people lost it. And some of them survived and they passed on their knowledge to other local cultures. So people like, say, coming out of Turkey, where we've now found some 12,000-year-old megalithic structures under the ground, wouldn't be hard for them to go down to Egypt and the Egyptian records say, hey, some people came here and told us how to build this Sphinxter. It's just like the one they used to have. So that's, circumstantial evidence at best, but it's not totally implausible.
Yeah. So there's apparently some like signs of erosion on your
Yeah,
Sphinxter.
that's the old piece of evidence. I don't know how totally confirmed that is, but I know guys have been saying for decades that the only time the Sphinx could have got this erosion damage is back when there was a lot of rainfall here, and the only time there was a lot of rainfall here was before it was a desert, which is thousands of years before the pyramids were built.
So it was climate change,
Could be, yeah, at least climate change, if
which
not aliens also.
which can only be caused by atmospheric CO2 levels, right?
That's what I'm seeing a lot of on the news lately.
I see. So, so actually, I pulled up the pyramids because I want to talk little about Gurdjieff.
All right.
What's the deal with Gurdjieff?
He's awesome. Try to imagine. Here's what I say about Gurdjieff. Try to imagine the Buddha crossed with Indiana Jones, crossed with Borat.
I gotcha. I see.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what good is he? Did you read Ichazo's take on him?
Yep.
Where he's like, so what's the big deal with the fourth way? He's like, the ancient Greeks were talking about this.
Yeah, and I think that's
include all the centers. Like, why is that so mind-blowing?
It's true, but it's a little bit disingenuous to say that because Gurdjieff isn't claiming it's novel. His specific claim is that this is an ancient thing that crops up periodically. So it's not like that undermines what he's saying. It amplifies what he's saying. Is that in addition to, like, if we're built like in the integral system, we wouldn't just say there's 3. We'd say there's a whole bunch, right? There's maybe 12 different intelligences. And you could be centered, you could be really good at one of them. And then because a lot of people become really good at one of them, there's probably a spiritual developmental system going back multiple civilizations wise that developed to handle that system. You're really good at focusing your mind. You're really good at your emotions. You're really good at body stuff. There's probably a spiritual system that accommodates that. Okay. But healthy, balanced human beings periodically happen as well. And sometimes there's a need for people that bring multiple systems into play, and that every ancient culture had some version of this that we can still inherit today.
Okay, cool. So was he a healthy, balanced individual?
In some ways. It's one of those things where you're like, he was a great man, but was he a good man? One of those things you're like, he was an amazing person, as most of the people who met him attest, and they were pretty awesome people themselves. So it's not like hillbillies were being impressed here, right? Like very accomplished people who were good at things and had done a lot in their lives and were critical in their thinking. Met this dude and was like, this dude is like an alien or a god or something. We're not sure what's going on here. He has more beingness than the rest of us. So that was happening, but that doesn't mean he was nice or shouldn't have stopped smoking before he died, or didn't go crazy and drive his car into a tree for no reason. That stuff.
I hear you. So what is the state of the Gurdjieff work today? Is anybody actually truly practicing the Gurdjieff work?
That is a hugely open question because even when he was alive, he was giving different messages to different students, allowing multiple interpretations, and setting up things in different communities, and also erratically changing his mind about things. So there was already a lot of different takes on it while he was alive. Once he died, that increased even more, even though there was a central kind of the Gurdjieff Foundation group. But it's been a couple generations since then, and a lot of people went through that and liked or disliked things and spread out. So it's really diverse. I would say there's a lot of people practicing it. They don't talk about it very much. They have a lot of internal disagreements about what it actually is. There's a huge dispute about whether they should take the Ouspensky stuff out or whether it's essentially the Gurdjieff-Ouspensky teaching. But my guess is there's more people doing it authentically today than there was 30 or 50 years ago, because I think people coming in fresh, reading the books, trying to get a sense of who this guy is, I think they have an edge over some of the people who belong to the inherited lineages, who, I mean, they can give us important practices and important contexts, but they also buy in without realizing it to the framing they first heard, which might be a limiting frame. And there's an argument that says Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, which is like the first book. The reason it's to his grandson rather than to his son is he expects the next generation to fuck it up. Oh. And if you read his history, every great teacher like the truth of what they're saying is gone in like one generation after what they were saying. So if anybody was trying to outthink that fact and set things up for the next couple generations to rediscover what he was actually saying, maybe it was this guy.
Got it. So what is the authentic Gurdjieff work that you see people practicing?
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
This is it's whiskey.
Oh, okay. I
It's
didn't know.
Ontario whiskey.
Are we gonna smoke weed today on the
No,
show?
but
Like Elon Musk?
if you've, I don't have any, but if I had some, if you got to, go ahead.
I might have some around here. Okay,
My
so yeah, the
take,
question is the
my
authentic
take on
Gurdjieff
the
work.
Gurdjieff, the authentic Gurdjieff teaching, and this would be disputed by, like any statement about Gurdjieff, it'll be disputed by 80% of the other people who are in the
Right.
group. So here's my take. The teaching is that there are, first of all, that we come in two pieces as human beings. We have our inherited essential intelligence that sort of dominates us when we're kids, like quickly gets replaced by a socialized form of intelligence
Mm.
that takes over our conscious waking experience. And our ability to be ourselves and to process incoming perceptions is like hijacked by this overly socialized consciousness. And what we need to do is find some way to cause that thing to blend with our inherited unconscious intelligence to bring forward a kind of meta intelligence that can take action in the world. And part of doing that is creating harmonies between our different subfunctions. Right. So I have this thing called the integration surplus model that extends this, but he normally just talks about body, mind, and heart, like all the ancient people did. But you want to get those in play in about the same amount so that they kind of blend, and that blending overflows and becomes a sense of something that's more beingness than your being and more you than you. And then you
More
can have a
human than human.
relationship with that in life and start to live differently and build up higher bodies or like different experiences of being yourself. And this happens in sort of graduated organic phase developmental shifts. And unless we do that, we're all just going to be locked into a socially programmed reality
Automatons,
set. Yeah.
robots.
Yeah.
So what is the
Robot.
work? What is the practice?
Well, it's very diverse. So like what I just outlined there, you could probably improvise all kinds of practices based on those things, right? Like you could sit down and do your seated meditation and you could try to follow your heart, mind, and body as subjective
That's what I'm doing
intelligences,
right now.
let them settle. Or you could be like, hey, I gotta work in the yard, but I should also be doing as much mental and emotional work, exactly as much mental and emotional work as I am doing physical work when I work in the
Right.
yard. And that will bring some other thing online. And if I do this with other people, we can get an even bigger process going. And I also need to work with my subconscious. This is a little bit tricky in terms of the Gurdjieff teaching because they don't always take it seriously. But if you read Beelzebub's Tales, he says flat out that what you normally call your consciousness is what he calls false. And what you normally call your subconscious is what he calls your real consciousness. So his system is a training of the subconscious, not a training of your wakeful conscious mind. So when you have those principles, you can look for opportunities to indulge them, to work on them, or you could find a group of people that already has a set of practices for that, which is what the Gurdjieff groups provide, which very often kind of self-critical, self-monitoring, multidimensional, labor-based exercises of various kinds within community. Lots of different ways to do it.
Labor-based.
Yeah,
So
I mean, you have to make efforts is part of the system.
yeah, so the diamond approach is actually a fourth way. It's
Sure,
of the fourth way lineage, which
sure.
of course is heavily disputed by 80% of Gurdjieffians. But one of the important practices is life practice, is what they call it. where you are practicing doing mundane, ordinary activities, labor, as you'd call it, but from presence,
Yeah,
embodied presence.
absolutely. I mean, there's a famous Gurdjieff quote where is it's better to wash one floor consciously than write 1,000 books as you are now.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So what about the super will?
The super will.
Yeah, that's sort of how I heard it described, right? There was like this example of how like you're walking home a
Okay.
mile in the rain
Yeah.
or something, and instead of going when you get home, instead of going inside, you walk like another 10 miles
Yeah.
in the rain,
Okay.
uphill
Yeah.
both ways.
There's this notion of super efforts.
Yes.
According to what Ouspensky says, Gurdjieff said.
Okay.
Right. But if you go, well, what did Gurdjieff do and what's implied by the teachings? There is this sense of making additional unnecessary efforts. And by unnecessary, we mean that your circumstance doesn't demand it and your habit doesn't demand it. Right. So people can make a lot of efforts. Everybody is making efforts in life. It's not like we're sponges here, right? People work hard and they do stuff that sucks and they use up their energies in life. But mostly they use up their energies according to their habits or their indulgences or what they socially have to do. So when you make an effort that isn't based on that, right? You go, well, I've got to walk home. That makes total sense. You walk home, it's a rainstorm. I got there. Great. Now, if I were to walk another mile, now it's kind of arbitrary. It's gratuitous. Now it's going to be just an intentional action that I'm going to have to really experience. And the whole time I'm going to be, why the fuck am I doing this? And I got to like keep pushing the go button in my brain. And the feedback system between my intention and my activity and my consciousness is going to be very different on that extra mile than it was when I just was like, well, you got to get home, so I got to do this thing.
Yeah, your mind's going to be like, what is the point of this? This is stupid.
Yeah, so you're going to have this churning pluralistic friction between different parts of yourself. And if that goes right, between them, they can generate an extra kind of energy that pertains to your more integrated possibilities of being.
Okay. So, in the diamond approach, there are these wisdom vehicles,
Sure.
wisdom bodies. One of them is the Citadel. And the Citadel is like the support for living a life of truth, which I find corresponds to Gurdjieff's work. It's sort of it's about accessing the will to live a life of truth.
Yeah. There are a number of teachers who are like the diamond approach, sometimes considered to be part of a fourth way tradition and other times not considered to be so. People like E.J. Gold and Lee Lozowick, right? And what they do is really bridge between more non-dual devotional surrender transcendence descriptions and this thing that you have to build up in yourself, your work body, that helps you anchor and stabilize and become a functional vehicle for those other forms of yourself, which are much more transcendental. And a lot of that, in my view, has to do with somatic experience, right? If you can experience the all over inside of your whole body all at once, that's almost like a kind of a container where you can start to bring together different kinds of impressions, different kinds of experiences of yourself, and the results of different kinds of willful activity to build up a general, harmonious, stable, hyper self or integrated will. And that more individual version of you can mediate between the lower individual and the more transcendental options.
Sounds good. What do you think of E.J. Gold?
Uh,
Do you know Faisal Muqaddam? Diamond Logos? He said E.J. Gold suffers from cosmic insanity.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell what suffering means in that context. But
Or he enjoys it.
I I'm a big fan of Lee Lozowick, and I know that Lee respected EJ a lot. I've read a few of EJ's books where honestly I like the title more than I like the content of the books. I don't know what he's really doing. I don't have much personal experience of his students. There's some interesting ideas that have come out of his work, but I've never been really personally attracted to or impressed by him.
Okay.
But I don't want to write him off because I know people who really respect him.
Okay. Who would you write off?
That's a good question. I'm probably nobody.
Word on the street is it's nobody.
My approach to human beings is basically that you reformulate your reality tunnel to match them rather than go, well, I can't match that person or I can't match that person. And so you get different degrees. Maybe this person can give you 5 and that person can give you 100, but it doesn't matter because you want to adjust your thing to get as much as you can get from each one. So I don't really write anybody off, but some people provide me with a lot less than other people.
Yeah, you have lower expectations.
Yeah, and this goes along with that, the shit I talk about is the metaphysics of adjacency. Like, what does reality look like if you take 0% and 100% off the table, right? Everything is in some kind of flexible gradient. There's no zero, there's no nothing, there's no everything, there's no you have no value to me or you have the only value to me. It's always somewhere in there.
I see. So you don't have to take a stand on anything.
I take a stand on this.
Touche. So, switching topics here.
All right.
What the hell is going on with the world?
Well, like, well, he says like he's got the answer.
Surely you know something.
I'll tell you.
I mean, you're like a super. What is your IQ? Like 170 something?
I don't know. There's a scene in Silence of the Lambs where Hannibal Lecter's like, they gave me these personality tests and I made them into origami.
Origami bears.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I feel. Like I'm not quite interested in. This is the perverse part of me. I think IQ tests are beneath me.
Yeah, they don't go that high. They don't go high enough.
They judge. There's a lot of people who have much, maybe not a lot. There's some people who have a more rigorous, high-speed cognitive faculty than myself, and so I'm acutely aware of that all the time. I don't feel brilliant, but let's put that aside.
Okay, we're gonna put it
What's
aside.
going on with the world?
To it. Yeah, what
the world is facing a meta crisis. And the meta crisis is the accumulating result of implicit patterns that have been in the various permutations of human society all along, but got dramatically magnified by modernity. And modernity incentivizes its own destruction and exports that to the entire global frame.
That's fucking awesome.
Post-modernity should be able to critique that and help. And it has a little, but
it's really just modernity 2.0, isn't it?
Well, in some respects, it is, right? Some of post-modernity is actually pre-modern. Some of it is just modernity doing a different tactical marketing scheme. Some of it's modernity 2.0, and some of it's legitimately a bigger reference frame that can critique modernity and say what's fucked up about it. But because that's such a mess, you need another one to say, which of the post-modernities is valid? So then you need an integral or a meta-modern lens or something.
Post
modernity,
and then we need post modernity.
Exactly. But basically, we've got a accelerating and accumulating set of crises that modernity is incentivized to create and doesn't know how to grapple with. And we have to figure out how to tease the factors that cause those apart from all the really good things modernity gave us. And at the same time, the new technologies, which it has given birth to, have created a new information space in which, as Terence McKenna used to say, like, ambiguity is the only thing on the market these days, or something like that, right? Because you can't rely on information anymore. So the information ecology is in one sense degraded, but in another sense open to the fact that all symbolic information was always highly suspect, and that a general kind of peculiarity or weirdness is building up in the system.
Yeah.
Which might be what's necessary for us to have communication with aliens, but that's highly speculative.
Okay. Are you an alien?
That's highly speculative.
I see.
But not a no.
Right. So, so you're saying we need integral level consciousness to save the world?
Yeah, and you need it in your self along multiple dimensions of yourself, and you need it in the social ethos, and you need it to be instantiated in our actual economic and technological systems, and you need that really fast or there's going to be a huge catastrophe, and that seems really implausible, so there's going to be a huge catastrophe.
Yeah, I'm saying that's not going to happen. So
it's not going to happen, not anytime soon, not before the oceans die.
So then what's the point in doing any of this stuff? Why are we trying to save the world?
I want to say two things about that, because
is that the white man's burden, our sort of missionary zeal to save humanity from itself?
We should be trying, right? There's things you should do even if it's a failure. Things to be good, things to make yourself better.
Is that the Gurdjieffian way?
Yeah. And the white man's burden and the whatever, right? You've still
or
got
the red man in your case.
You've still got to do your best.
Well, you're purple, I guess.
And you may be able to do things when you're doing your best that have a multi-dimensional utility that outlives your life or the life of the world.
I see.
That's
so
not out of the question.
You think in like 100 years they're going to be like watching Integral Stage and being like, man, this guy really figured it out. Why didn't anyone listen to him?
Oh, yeah. Like, I'm very optimistic over the 200-year time span. I'm not very optimistic over the 3 decades time span.
Okay.
But there's existentially, you have no choice but to try to do better and be good and help things. But that I want to put all that on one side, and I want to not dismiss the feeling of why do anything, because I think lean into the despair, right? We don't have to think it's going to work in order to do good work. And I think we're probably holding ourselves back emotionally on this sort of really superficial idea that we can figure out how to fix it, and we can't. If you accept the doom, that's your pathway to a post-doom personality, which is much more relaxed and I think much more able to help.
Post-doom.
Yeah, that's not my phrase. It's going around, but
that's like trans-apocalypse.
Yeah, I really feel a lot better since I gave up, and I'm really impressed by guys like Nietzsche, who explained how the great civilizations of the past were very almost pathologically tragic in their mentality. His first book, The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music, it says, hey, the people you like about the Greeks, Socrates and Plato and Euripides and math and all this stuff, those guys, they weren't building up that cultural wisdom. They were spending it. It was built up by the people before them. They built this wisdom. And those guys, they created all the tragic plays. They created all these legends where like life sucks. You're just going to lose. And the hero is going down. You're going to be torn to pieces. That was their mentality. It was tragic. But who contributed more to human history than those dudes, right? So there's no correlation between optimism and helping. You may want to let yourself get totally depressed about it, and that might be a much better way for you to become a helper.
So that's like going to the underworld and coming back.
Yeah. Let it go, man.
to hell and back. Yeah, so there's this notion of like not being fixed to the outcome. You know, not being attached to the outcome, not even thinking about the future. it's not even like being post doom. It's just like dropping doom as a whole concept,
Yeah.
dropping future. That seems to be, so there's this trend now, right? Where like a lot of people are still participating in the collective thing, and they're just like marveling at the insanity of it all, and it's making a lot of people like bitter and resentful and angry and distraught, and those people are all over Facebook and in our community. And then there's this trend towards just like disconnecting from the whole thing completely and becoming hyper individuated, which you and I spoke about previously. It seems like the hyper individuation thing is the next track, is the next stage at this point, because participating in the collective is just, it's insane. It's crazy making. It's like every day brings new insanity. So it's like, how long can you last before you decide the whole thing is just not even worth participating in? And this brought us to the topic of magic. Magic, hyper individuated magic as an alternative to doing the whole collective thing, where we're like having dialogues and we're theorizing and we're trying to get other people to believe our ideas and we're arguing and we're like trying to come up with solutions, and we're just trying to play the collective game and trying to get everybody in the collective on the right page, versus sort of what you're talking about with yourself, which is like just sort of being beyond all that or without all that and just doing your own autonomous thing. And somehow I can see the hyper autonomous thing being the right choice, paradoxically. Being the thing that might solve the mess.
I think there's a lot of truth to the need to make that shift. And it's not a complete shift, right? We're not saying you shouldn't
Well,
do
we're not going to Mars.
better. Everything, I think all the options have to be on the table. It's not about sacrificing efforts and projects that actually could make the world better. But it is about letting go of the emotional and psychological insistence that those are the way forward, like letting that thing die in you, and then bringing in place of that some more authentic, embodied, hyper individual response to the world. Because for all you know, maybe that's the better solution. Yeah, how do you know that what makes linear comprehensible sense to you is the way the world functions? If we can look at computational analysis and go, hey, most computational patterns in reality appear to be endless and non-predictable. You're like, okay, that means I will look at most patterns that are real patterns and they will not look like patterns to me. So I can't use my sense of what makes sense in order to determine what's a realistic functional part of the cosmos. I've got to be able to work with things that don't make sense to me. And that's where magic comes in. And you sort of start that from your own experience. It's a little bit also like that Gurdjieffian thing of bringing your subconscious up, right? Sort of evolving your subconscious rather than just your social conscious personality. You're going to make this other part of you that we could say is evolutionarily adapted to deal with nonlinear phenomenon. You're going to make that be more of a player in your actual experience of life. And its experiences of its perceptions and its possibilities is going to be different than what we normally ascribe to a contemporary individual. Some of that's figuring out ways to talk to your subconscious, get signs from it, make it do things for you. Some of it's perceiving the energetic dimension of reality differently.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. What is the relationship between magic, or how is magic expressed through or realized or experienced through knowledge of sort of the energetic reality of reality.
All right. All right. There's I mean, in integral theory, there's this thing called the subtle domain, right? So there's an argument which is there's a set of experiences and perspectives we would call subtle, which aren't material, but they're not infinite either. They're somehow affective, qualitative, energetic, disembodied things. And it's hard to
Yeah.
see where that's objective and where that's projected. It seems to be both of
So in the
those.
diamond approach, that would include essential aspects,
Okay.
which are considered deeper than energy.
Okay.
It's being.
So I'm thinking of it more in a shamanic sense, or let's say this, or I'm talking about the weaponization of prana is maybe a way to think about it, right? So we have these yogic traditions of working with and absorbing a vital, partially objective energy, right? Whether it's in the air or it's in a great cosmic reservoir or entity.
So if I have
And
COVID and I cough on you,
yeah,
that's weaponized prana.
that's could be, yeah.
Okay.
The COVID plus the electricity of the COVID.
Oh, gotcha.
But those yogic systems have their roots in early shamanic magic,
Hmm.
and their correlates in various more advanced magical traditions, whereby that subtle vitality, which on the one hand is a vividness, and on the other hand is a tingliness, right? That things have different degrees of this, and we can perceive those. And when we perceive those, we can then interact with them or participate with them in certain ways by absorbing them or inspecting them or talking with them or dancing with them in various ways. And you can feel like you're accumulating, nourishing yourself on more of that stuff to then operate from a different level. If you get more of that, you can communicate with those different aspects. You can contemplatively appreciate that stuff. Like there's the tree, and then there's, oh man, the treeness. It's so tree, I can't even believe it. That's a slightly different thing. Or you talk to somebody and you go, hey, I like people. People are great, but when I'm talking to this person, I'm like, really, I'm looking at their glowiness. Right? There's some other thing, and it's so them. It's more them than they are, and it looks like a semi-luminous radiance quality. And if I can have a relationship with that, then my relationship's going to seem more magical.
Okay, so now you're sort of talking about relating with people's divinity.
Sure. I just want to say, like, not just people though, but like
Trees.
blocks of dirt and trees and the air and yourself, the divine like aspect of any form.
Right. So you're going beyond the person and their egoicness
Yeah.
and relating with their divinity.
Yeah.
Okay. And that gets a little more magical.
Yeah.
But what about like manifestation?
Like magic causing shit to happen.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly seems like that happens. Now, if you fully subjected it to rigorous scientific study, how much would be left? That's debatable because it hasn't really happened. But it certainly seems like you can perform certain kinds of practices that are partly objective and partly subjective, which involve your subconscious and your experience of energy, and very often the serious play of ritual and focus and relationship in various ways. And that these seem to, cautiously speaking, skew the probabilities of how the world turns out along particular tracks. Right. So this is speculative, like Rupert Sheldrake kind of stuff, which is in addition to all the randomness of the cosmos, things can be set up that make the randomness tilted, makes a slope or a slant in the randomness, so that you make an attractor form that is not inevitable, but makes randomness more likely to lead in that direction than in some other direction.
Okay. So let's talk about the law of attraction,
All right.
which I've always regarded as magical thinking, the ego wanting to manifest, get whatever goodies it wants without doing much hard work or something like that. Right?
Yep.
And then there's this like sort of higher resolution take where it's like, no, you're becoming like an energetic match for the thing that you want. So like if I want you to give me money, I'm gonna be like, hey Layman, like, you're a cool guy, rather than like, Layman, you're a fucking asshole, give me all your money, The other one is sort of, well, maybe for you it's the lower vibration that would be more effective. But but then there's this notion of being an individuated creational field. Meaning you are God. You're just waking up to that. You're waking up to the reality that you are God, and God isn't out there orchestrating creation. God is in here orchestrating creation, participating in it, being in. So we have the potential to be agents of creation, right?
Mm-hmm. I think there's I would add a third thing, right? Because on the one hand, there's this utter nonsense, right? This completely solipsistic view that just the world is controlled by what I happen to think about. And what's more, I'm willing to pay any idiot almost anything to tell me that about myself, right? So there's a very weak psychology involved in that. And on the other hand, you go, well, there's a very rational, cautious thing. It goes, well, I can reprogram my own unconscious mind through acts of magic. Then the way I behave makes certain things more likely to occur because I will deal with people in the world in a different way because I've programmed myself differently through the magical act. And that all makes complete reasonable sense. In between those two is a set of other possibilities, sort of like you're describing, is what is the chance that I'm actually a creative field, possibly with a specific destiny or specific way that I could influence the world, that would be my most convergent integrated act that would participate in the most convergent creative act of the universal field. And so that I would be serving the greater destiny of transcendence while also making magical, interesting things seem to happen.
Yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's the thing we
and
need
I don't think
want.
It's out of the question. I don't think it's 100%, but it's not out of the question either.
I see.
It's in that.
So are we gods?
Some parts of us are
not in
God,
like the Andrew Cohen, like I am God, worship me kind of way, but
yes. I mean, the thing we think of as a God, right? The ability to intentionally, as if intentionally, generate forms, right? We all have that in some degree. Right? If I can skew my imagination to make shapes or words, I have some power like that. If I can say, hey, move my arm and my arm moves, or if I want to go to the bathroom and I get up and go to the bathroom, that's amazing. I just thought that and then it happened. Right?
Setting the bar pretty low, Layman.
I know. What I'm saying is, I think everybody can agree that to some grade or other, we have these abilities to do something like will causing manifestation. How much further can it go? That's uncertain, but we're already behaving like gods in small ways. There's no reason to think we could not extend that, perhaps not indefinitely, but certainly a lot further than we normally do.
Right. So our potential is pretty unlimited in a certain way.
And I think that what I would call will practice, or sometimes I call it whim fulfillment, because I think it pays for it to be a little bit gratuitous, if you think of a thing and then make yourself do that thing, what are you practicing doing? You're practicing turning an intention through discipline into a reality. And that's an interesting skill to practice. And it feels, or can feel, very magical. It has definite effects in the world, and it over time shifts your consciousness into a different sensibility.
Okay, but there is this sort of this emerging trend that I'm noticing where
All right.
you're beyond intention, and it's more like you go blind. You go blind to the future. You go blind to possibilities. You go blind to goals, and then you just become this agent of creation, where what you're creating is just emerging from the emptiness, from the stillness.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You froze for a second. I'm trying to see.
No, I just went
You're
into
still there
this.
now.
I just went into the stillness. It
There are
emerged in
several.
that moment.
Yeah. So assuming this recording transmission is working properly, what I would say is there are several different ways to go about this process, right? Because what is intention like? It's not like, "Oh, I have to make this happen." It's a little bit like that, but not totally. And it's not like, I don't care what happens, but it's a little bit like that, but not totally, right? To ride a
Right.
horse, you have to hold on tight, but not too tight. So between these two extremes of complete surrender and complete control, which aren't really possible for us anyway, there's a sweet spot of flow where it feels like we are the expression of the integrated or integrating cosmos acting uniquely through us. And very often in that mode, it seems like things come together to manifest or coincidentally operate in a way that's a little bit or even a lot beyond the causality we ascribe to an ordinary human being.
Right. So so it seems like the collective insanity is largely what stops us from realizing that.
Ask that again. This is glitching a little.
You're glitching.
You're glitching.
I was just saying it seems like the collective insanity is the thing that's stopping us. Our attachment to all that is what's stopping us from really going inside. Because every day I wake up, even if I don't read the news, I'm going to have someone like messaging me and being like, hey, did you see this latest thing that the woke did and how crazy it was? And we're like, yeah, it's crazy, man. And like, then we all just feel like these disempowered victims of the collective.
um Mostly I'm a little bit hesitant on that, because what I'd prefer to say is the absence of an adequate set of practices and lifestyle habits that builds up a sufficient weight in the individual makes us vulnerable to the predation from the social. That if we had more going on in the other dimension, this thing would not affect us as much.
I see.
Now, part of the reason we don't have that going on is thousands of years of the social co-opting and parasitizing our individual experience. But now it's now. And so we need to, it's
Yeah,
not
dude.
so much a matter of what we have too much of, but also what we don't have enough of. What is it that we need to build up in ourselves that gives us a relative degree of freedom from those processes?
Gotcha. Um, which may require unhooking.
Yes. Yeah, there's a great phrase from Gurdjieff that your development consists of personal experiences personally experienced. Right. So like it's not just good enough that you're living your life. You have to really experience your experiences. right? And that's part of where your presence grows, is in really receiving what you are receiving. One of the problems with the social and the technological is the constant mediation, right? I'm not against art. I grew up obsessed with taking pictures on old timey cameras, but when a person sees a thing, goes, well, that's neat, and the first thing they do is grab their digital device and put it between them and the thing, right? I'll store this darshan for later. Well, you're not going to get that darshan later. If you had kept that thing in your pocket and instead spent 10 extra seconds intentionally focusing on the experience, you might walk away with something you can keep, something that makes you be a different you.
Yeah. I hear you. Like I went camping last weekend. It was just in awe at all the mountains and stuff. And then I was like, oh, I can take a picture of this and like send it to this person and they'll give me a like and then or a heart react. It's just even better. And then but then I looked at my pic and I can post it on Instagram and people will think I'm cool. But I looked at the picture and I'm like, this sucks. Like the majesty is gone.
Yeah.
And so all of our experiences are now being mediated through this like techno-social thing, this medium.
That's a beautiful and creepy way to say it. The majesty is gone.
Yeah.
There's a great one of those Shambhala texts from Chogyam Trungpa. Somebody asks him about magic, and he talks about Drala. He talks about a majesty spirit that's largely a natural phenomenon that we can make contact with. And if we make contact with it, it changes where we're operating in the world from. Right. So there's a majesty there, but you have to do something to get that. And there's also things you can do that prevent you from getting that.
Yeah. So should we get rid of our smartphones?
No, they're great. You just gotta have something that makes you use them better.
Right. So you have to like not engage as an addiction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a whole host of things, right? There's a whole dharma of its own about how to deal with this shit. Right? Like, what do you need? You're like, first of all, you need to build up the intentional force to be able to use it or not use it on purpose, regardless of your reactions. You need to build up the psychological awareness. So there's always a critical distance between you and the content, because you don't know if this content is real, and your own reaction, because you don't know if your first reaction to social artifacts is correct. So you got to have that mindfulness negotiation space. You've got to have enough viscerally felt weight to your own beingness that you don't have to jump at this because you've already got a lot of weight on this side. You need a history of practices of knowing that it pays off for you doing other things. There's a whole education system that would be needed to pull this off. And since we don't have it, we're doomed.
I was going to say, man, you make living in the world seem impossible. You're like, you got to build this up. You got to undo this. You got to like get to this stage. Yeah. You know, you got to like jump over the flag and go into the castle and then warp to level 7 or 9 or whatever, you know, with the pipes.
Sure.
It
depends how you want to live.
Why is living so fucking hard, man?
Depends how you want to live. Right? I mean, this is another Gurdjieff thing, right? Man, you not want to die like a dog. Right? You can live in the world like a dog, which is to say you live in a world as basically a human animal, and you're going to undergo all the rewards and also miseries and also failures and also successes of an ordinary human organism. Now, if that's not good enough, then it's going to get harder to pull something else off.
Yeah. You're going to have to go from like this pyramid to this pyramid.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also, I mean, if we're talking just practically speaking, if there is, which there is, a problem of the overweening presence of the social in the individual psychology, then you have to negotiate a better relationship with the social. And one of the ways you do that is emotionally going, hey, I think the social's going to fail here. I don't think it's going to pull this off. I'm watching these ecological tipping point documentaries, and it looks like it's already fucked. Now, regardless of the objective situation, and there's many ways in which it's going to get worse, even if we get things right, and we're probably not going to get them right, there's at least this internal thing where you have to be willing to accept that possibility as a means of negotiating more space between you and the social dimension.
Okay. What the hell is the purpose of the pyramids?
You know, when I was a kid, I had this book, Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. My grandmother left it to me when she died, and I was pretty young. So it was a huge book of ancient Rosicrucian and Freemasonic symbolism and practices, and the pages were in Roman numerals. So I had to quickly learn Roman numerals in order to use the index and find things in this book. One whole chapter was about the layout of the pyramids, treated as an esoteric initiation machine. I was always fascinated by it. So one of the most interesting ideas, try to imagine this. You are the son of the pharaoh, of the god emperor. And he's going to train you to be a god emperor. And a god emperor has to choose a thing and make people do it for 1,000 years. That's intense. Most people can't pull that off. So what has to happen to you? You have to be mutated psychologically to perform this role. So here's one of the things they do. They put you in this giant pretend mountain they built. And it's full of creepy rooms and, Anubis statues and shit. And they put you in there in the dark, and they give you a whole bunch of DMT that they get from acacia trees, because there's some speculation that's how the Egyptians were getting their tryptamine molecules. So your head's full of hallucinogens. You're in the dark, in the pyramid. You're terrified, and there's priests running around chanting and freaking you out in the dark. And everything just goes to hell. You lose your mind in this place. And in the morning, because it's the right day of the year, down this one special slit, the sun rises. You're coming down. You've survived unbelievable horror. And now through this beam, the rising sun power shines down on you, and you are sane and competent and free of your dark fears. And it's just you and the sun, man. And so now you're ready to be the pharaoh.
Okay, so it's like this gauntlet that you have to run. It's kind of like a hazing ritual.
Yes, yeah. It's Maze Runner meets The Fly. It's a machine for transforming you into a superhuman.
That's what you think it is? It's not like communicating with aliens or something like that?
Listen, there's a lot of ways to make contact with ultra-terrestrials of various kinds, and we should be taking that way more seriously than we traditionally have. But you don't need a special pretend rock mountain to do that. Right? You could be making contact with the aliens just as well in the desert as in the pyramid. So I don't think that can be its primary function.
Okay, fine. That's not the magical take on it, but I think there's more to it than that. Am I supposed to be
representing everybody who's pro magic?
Yeah.
No, man, pyramids are amazing, hyperdimensional geometries that allow us to communicate.
Well, why are there so many of them?
Outside of our reality.
Do you graduate from this level to this level, this one, then this one, then this one?
No, man. You don't graduate.
Man. I think your theory's breaking down
11
here.
Dude to being a 6'3" dude. You just happen to have different heights.
Did slaves build the pyramids?
Yeah, more or less.
Were they Jewish?
Some of them. Here's one thing, though. I strike a kind of balance, because I think a lot of esoteric factors were in play, but I think any kind of cartoon narrative that exaggerates the ambiguities of history is kind of foolish, right? Well, look at this, is impossible. It couldn't have been done this way, and therefore it must have been done that way. That's over the top and unnecessary, or at the very least, it's just holding space for people to investigate a peculiarity. But what was the real peculiarity? Hard to say. My feeling is esoterically developed human beings, which existed in networks in prehistoric and early historical civilizations, were capable of things that we today would find to be amazing. And they often were able to get other people to cooperate on ridiculous projects that made sense to a small number of esoteric adepts who had pretty reliable practices for super integrating all of their parts and all of the genres of cultural knowledge. Because when you look at the pyramids and you go, hey, look at the math and look at the astrology and look at the calendar and look at the stars, and plus it's a complete history and it's a complete mythology and it relates to you, like, that's amazing. It's like they took every single kind of thing you could know in culture and fused it into one thing. Unbelievable. How advanced would you have to be to do that? Not more advanced than a human, but you'd have to be a very advanced human, a human whose being is practically alien to the people around you. And I think, and this goes into kind of what I call the coaxial version of integral theory, that some of the higher levels of integration are actually more probable at lower stages of cultural development. There are fewer things to integrate, and you are in a more natural circumstance. And that makes you pulling off a super integration more likely than if you live in a very artificial way with a million more things you'd have to integrate. So totalizing integration of self and culture might be more likely in the esoteric schools of the archaic period than they are today. Although if we could pull it off today, it might be even more awesome. I think it happened more often in the past.
I see. Well,
do I sound like a lunatic?
Always. Look, man, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
Here's what I'm saying is, it's something that legitimately feels like aliens. And it probably is downstream of human beings who did their human being thing to such a degree that their beingness felt alien, but they were also coupled with entity-like phenomenon, which also feel very alien to us.
Yes. So, okay, do you know about Robert Edward Grant?
Sure.
So he actually correlated the Vitruvian Man by DaVinci with the Great Pyramid.
It's a natural move to make if the pyramid is already a structure representing the super integration of many forms of knowledge, as is Vitruvian Man. The next step, fuse them together.
But he used it to basically find a a theorized hidden chamber beneath the pyramid. This is all speculative, but according to his calculations, there are different parts of the pyramid that correspond to the Vitruvian Man. And based on his calculations, there should be, in addition to all the other things that they've sort of correlated, there should be a hidden chamber that is as yet discovered.
I will believe it when I see it. And I know that a lot of people, in my experience, a lot of people with really good minds for super coordinating fields of information tend to get carried away with their particular version of doing that. But that doesn't mean I think it's a bad thing to do. I think it's the best thing you can do, right? Your job as a human being is to super coordinate all the kinds of experience and knowledge that you're aware of. And I think our ancestors did that beautifully in some ways, that the things that we inherit, like the Kabbalistic map or all these different ancient systems of super knowledge, I think they're downstream of people doing a good job at super connecting experience. However, that's a little bit different than a professional contemporary meta model, right? We might want to apply some more standards to it today. But in practice, what we each want to do is super coordinate as many dimensions of our experience as possible to generate the surplus coherence that is our generalized higher beingness. And sometimes that's going to look magical.
Okay.
Now that we got that out of the way.
Well, we're going to jump to related topics. Couple of things coming to mind: the vector equilibrium
All right.
and the Enneagram. I kind of wish I had a hat right now.
Yeah, scarves are great. You can do almost anything with them. Now I'm a little old babushka.
So here we have the vector equilibrium,
All right.
which is a cuboctahedron.
So.
And Buckminster Fuller said that this was like the basic building block of all matter.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, Buckminster Fuller was a genuine wizard, and anybody who starts thinking
Was he
about
Buckminster full of it, or is there something to it?
No, he was he was full of the right kind of thing, I think. Because he tried very hard to do the most with the least. He did a number of different aspects of reality and probably dynamic tensegrity and geometric forms that use minimal amount of force to hold each other together with maximal strength. That was probably his major forte, right? Much more successful than his innovations in housing and cars and maps and things like that. I think there is, in the structure of the reality we see, some underlying syntactical and or geometric super efficiencies that are implied by any system that works. And if we see them more clearly, we can take more advantage of them. If we want to build the way nature builds, which is getting the most for the least and also having it look amazing.
It's a pyramid.
Yeah, man.
That's one of its forms that it collapses into.
Yeah. You think these things are going to come out of the desert and reform into the whole vector system and fly away?
Yeah.
That could be awesome.
But he said this thing right here was the building block of all, the basic building block of all matter. And that there was this constant heartbeat going on.
Yep.
You can't necessarily tell, but this is going in one direction and then it immediately reverses and pulses in the other direction. This is the heartbeat of the universe.
So I would say that it's not complete and it's not wrong. Right? Like if you track down linear geometries to their most basic level, you're going to get something like that. Right? Complex multi-point geometric linearity that is dynamic and can produce all the kinds of effects we see. Now, you don't have to trace it down that way. If you you could discover it as a dynamic field torus, for example, where it looks like a circle swooping into itself forever, where the outside becomes the inside in two directions simultaneously. And if you've ever seen some of these videos on YouTube that purport to be what the electron really looks like, that's what it looks like. It's going this way and that way, and it's going in and out, and it goes into the center, and it's got all these spots, but it's not done with points and straight lines. So if you do it with field swoops, or you do it with points and lines, or you do it with archetypes, or you do it with sensation, or you do it with aesthetics, there's lots of ways to get down there. So I think that one's legitimately down there as a basic building block of reality. But that doesn't mean it's the only lens, and a different lens will provide a different structure that is equivalent to that one, that provides a different style of reality.
I gotcha. So I know somebody that has correlated the vector equilibrium with the Enneagram.
All right. So there's a lot of free time on their hands.
Yeah. I just got this the new Almas Enneagram book. What is your Enneagram type?
I don't know. Now, this is what I usually say to people. Like, look.
That's a typical layman answer.
Yeah. So
It's actually not.
I mean,
Usually
the
know everything.
relation between the way the Enneagram is used and the actual fourth way, dubious. I've taken a few Enneagram tests at other people's urging and gotten a diverse set of results. I've heard people speculate about my type, and I quickly forgot what they said. I'm always open to take any test anybody sends me, but I don't really care about it very much because I think all existing contemporary and ancient typologies are not that great. On the other hand, if you want to speculate
Okay, I
about
want to
my
get
type,
into
I'm
that.
willing to listen.
So what do people guess? You're like a 5 or a 7 or something like that?
Yes, I've heard 5 guessed many times.
Yeah, that would be like the most obvious. But I definitely feeling a lot of 7-ish vibes as well. And they're connected.
Years ago, as part of a government project, I took a Myers-Briggs test, and I got 2 types in perfect balance. And they're like, "Oh, well, take it again." So I took it again, and I got 2 other types in perfect balance. And so I was like, "Yeah, this is not really working for me."
Well, that's about the limitation of tests.
Yeah,
And even the Myers-Briggs it's a distortion of Jung,
yeah.
or it's a productization or a bastardization or a
Hard to say if it's an improvement or a
whateverization.
regression. Yeah.
Well,
Well, I think we're not
what's your
very
Myers-Briggs types?
well.
You're extroverted, right?
Not according to most of the Myers-Briggses I've taken. But that's one of the things. It's not that great in some ways. There's certain people for whom a lot of these tests are more slippery.
Well, it's a stupid question to begin with, like extrovert, because even in the Jungian function stack, your main function is going to be extroverted or introverted, and then you've got another function that's the inverse.
No, and
So
people
it goes
talk
extroverted,
about,
introverted, extroverted, introverted.
yeah, yeah.
So the people that are like, I'm an ambivert, it's like, well, sort of.
Well,
I mean, we all are.
I relate to a description of Johnny Carson I heard as an extrovert introvert, where this was a guy who, when the show was on, he was the most extroverted person in the country. And when the show was off, he didn't want to talk to anybody at all because he had to go and recharge for 24 hours on his own.
Yeah, so that's a typical introvert.
Yeah. On the
But
other
I don't.
hand, if he
Yeah.
didn't do the massive extroversion thing, he would go into depression. So he needed massive introversion charging and massive extroversion charging, right? So it's a useful tool, but there's a lot of ways for them to be both.
What is the charge? Like, what is the charging thing? Like, am I a battery and then like I need to go talk to? Now, I did hear something recently that was intriguing, that the human being is a battery and then it needs to be charged with like sunlight and stuff like that. But in this case, it's like I charge when I get away from people or something, or I charge talking to other. Like, am I a vampire, like an energy vampire in it, or I just like feed off of
Well, we'll
other
see. I mean, a lot of this stuff is very very Cosmo. There's a lot of like, what type are you? Oh, we just discovered there's multiple things.
Yeah,
right?
what's your Harry Potter house or whatever, right?
Exactly. So a lot
Like
of it's at that level.
What's I don't
You're
even know.
Slytherin?
Hufflepuff or Huggle
Huffle, I think, yeah, whatever that one is.
Hugglepuff Puff Pass.
Dude, you know what the Sorting Hat would say about you, man?
Here I do actually have the.
Oh, nice. Very profesh.
Yeah.
What the heck were we just discussing?
Everything.
Extroverts.
Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs.
Okay, so can you give us any personality type info about you?
No. Well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't think we're there yet, right? If you look through something like the integral model, and they're like, hey, we got stages, we got lines, we got shadow, we got levels. It's great.
All right, let's talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then they've got types, and you come to types, and you're like, yeah, you guys haven't really made any innovations there, have you? You just technically like there's a spot for types. And we know maybe there's something like masculine, feminine, and left and right, but beyond that, it's pretty sketchy.
Yeah. And even masculine and feminine these days will get you in trouble.
Yeah, it will get you in trouble. And so that makes it even harder to think about it in a more refined, complex fashion.
Let's talk about types because I was just in this Facebook group shitting all over the concept of typology.
Is that the name
And
of
then
the group?
no. It's actually called the Integral Enneagram.
I'm going to start a group called Shitting All Over the Concept of Typology.
Shitting on typology.
All right.
Because here's what I have seen happen. People like they take a test or whatever, or someone types them, and then type becomes a crystallized identity.
Yeah.
And then it gives them blinders, and then they just like go on for 10 years thinking they're this type. I mean, I thought I was a type for 10 years, and then after 10 years, I realized, oh, I'm a different type. And then now I'm just like, oh, wait, maybe I am that original type. So typology seems like a trap. So do stages, man.
I don't think they're traps, but I think there's a lot of dumb ways to do them, and we usually do them the dumb way.
Well, right. That's the trap.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it any different than most things in life.
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking like the Enneagram, for example. It's better if we just pick up the Enneagram and we just explore ourselves from all 9 points.
There are ways that that's useful, and there's ways where doing that sometimes means temporarily adopting an identity. Right?
Sure.
Now,
yeah. I'm a 1, I'm a 2, I'm a 3.
You might change later, right? Some people go, I'm just playing with this one right now, and other people go, no, this is me. But that person might be the person who changes soonest to something else. So I think everybody is basically playing with it in some way. And I think that's because in general, we don't have very scientific tools for how to do that yet. We probably have to have a very sophisticated computer grouping traits of all different kinds and clumping them together before we get something like a typology, because this old-fashioned clock and wheel, there's 7, there's 12, there's 9. And a lot of them look like caricatures of medieval jobs. You're the wizard, you're the king. Like, that's all so simplistic. It can't possibly be the case about an organic universe.
Right.
But we could get there. Like, I don't doubt that we could get way better at typology than we are now, probably with the computer's help. But right now, it's mostly just a way to get superficial psychological feedback on yourself. You know, I was at my uncle's house a couple of years ago. He, like me, was born a Pisces, and we were looking at the definitions, and we both agreed that we related more to the Aries definition. And then his wife, who was downstairs, my aunt, she came up. He's like, what are you? And you're like, we said, well, we're both Aries because it's very Pisces to consider yourself to be Aries. So there's a lot of room to play. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it just seems like typology is just like personality typologies are just endless.
Yeah. And they're not much better than newspaper horoscopes, which are proven to be terrible, but which can provide you with a useful way to play at being yourself and discover some things about yourself for a while. And I'm not shitting on astrology in general. There's some very interesting things about the correspondences between society, psychology, and cosmic objects. But that shit they put in the newspaper about Geminis has nothing to do with that.
Okay. So typologies suck, and they're awesome.
Yes, they suck and they're awesome.
That's the typical layman answer. All right, well, now what?
I don't know. It's your show.
Well, we've been talking for an hour and a half.
I don't want to stop.
Okay. Let's talk about sex.
Okay.
That's always a great topic to switch to when you run out of things to talk
A
about.
sudden segue to sex.
So, are you getting laid lately?
Yes.
Nice. What's that like?
Well, as you might have heard, we over the course of COVID evolved a little bit toward the daily ritual format, which has then added in some more classic ceremonial sex magic type things, which are fascinating to explore. But our very charged particular relationship added in this interesting element of over regularity, let's say. I once saw a tantric master in an interview, asked how often you should have sex, and he said, so often that you never want sex. Now, at the time, I was a kid, and I was like, that's crazy. But now I'm like, I kind of see that.
Interesting. So you're a sex addict.
Well, it's high on my priority list for sure.
I see. Okay, so let's talk about sexual marketplace.
All right.
What's the condition of the sexual marketplace right now?
You mean like because I have a Coke tattoo on my ass?
Do
you mean the use of sex as a kind of marketing tool? Or do you mean like treating sex thoughts as if they were commodities?
No, but more like supply and demand.
Ah, okay. Well, it depends what country you're in, of course. I think there's some ongoing discourse that there's a changing sensibility about sex, like, oh, there was this wave of feminism and this wave of feminism, and then there was masculinism, and then there was hookup culture, and now there's a reconsideration of hookup culture, right? But all of that is very minute fluctuations on the surface. I don't think it affects most people's lives very strongly, only the lives of people that want to temporarily experiment with playing the game of taking social cues seriously, which I think most human beings don't actually do that much. I think there's much deeper shifts going on, though. I think the technological moment is more radical than we have understood, and it will take us a long time to viscerally appreciate what it means to have contraceptive pills, sex change operations, and the creation of babies in labs. All of that stuff undoes the entire evolutionary history of gender and sexuality from the first organisms. We've been playing a game where we split into two and then we combine to make the new thing. And that is the underwriting motivation of the majority of our psychological and sociological processes as they've evolved on this planet. And now it doesn't necessarily apply. And that's radical. We aren't going to know for centuries what that's going to do to us.
Yeah, we have easy access to contraceptions, plus abortion. These things are lowering the cost of sex, potential cost of sex for women. We have the breakdown of, marriage, traditional marriage, and the apps, the dating apps, are allowing people to have sex completely anonymously. And so like, for example, traditionally a woman's community would keep her sexuality constrained. She doesn't want to be slut shamed or whatever. But now she's free to indulge her instincts completely anonymously without a lot of the traditional consequences.
Well, I'm generally positive about these changes. I think we need to try to appreciate.
That's because you're getting laid.
Well, that could be.
But now we have this like army of incels.
Well, I think they've always been with us.
But their numbers are growing.
Well, I don't know if that's true. The reporting is growing. That's not always the same as a change in the actual phenomenon. I think we're going to face a much more diverse and complicated field of sexual realities since we decoupled it from reproduction. And that's not like a moral choice we've individually made. That is the immediate effect on everyone of the technological shift that's occurred in several areas, which has essentially decoupled sex from reproduction. There was cultural anticipation of this move for a few hundred years. But now we really don't have to have it be that way. And so all of our inherited instincts, which were very smart instincts for reproduction being the essential nature of sexuality, they are now all in contrast to our current social and technological reality. And I don't think we're going to go back. We have to understand that where we thought there was one or two things, there's now going to be 12 or 15 things. That doesn't mean they can't stabilize. It doesn't mean they can't be as deep or as moral or as productive as possible. It doesn't mean there isn't a huge future for non-traditional marriage, right? It doesn't mean we can't get way smarter about having healthy and responsible, intelligent, useful sex lives. We absolutely can. And some of the radical changes in the last couple of generations, I think, have been really useful for empowering people. But there's no going back. It's going to be a much more complicated playing field forever, right?
Yeah. Let me read this to you.
Do it.
Genetic research has shown that before the modern era, 80% of women managed to reproduce, but only 40% of men did. The obvious conclusion from this is that a few top men had multiple wives, while the bottom 60% of men had no mating prospects at all.
Well, that's not great. Because I'm pretty sure those weren't our best guys.
Which one, the top men?
Best liars and murderers.
Yeah, the dark triad fellas.
And here's the other part of the technological situation. Not only do we not have to have babies when we have sex, not only can we make babies different ways, not only can we physically switch genders, but now we're going to have to live in different environments than what we adapted to, right? What's Mars going to be like? What's it going to be like if the climate changes radically? Right? We can't just breed as we've been traditionally breeding. We might need the kinds of people who we've not been practicing to breed. We might need people who you or I would hate or think are just dysfunctional weirdos, but they might turn out to be exactly the human organisms we need for the next totally weird shit that's coming down the pipeline. So we need to open this thing up. And then once we've opened it up, then we need to start getting smart and moral and responsible and creative and intelligent about it. But we can't simplify it or go back.
So are you planning to reproduce?
Most of my reproduction is like this informational reproduction. I don't actually.
We're birthing a baby right now.
I mean, we got some kids here, but I never felt a strong drive toward biological reproduction.
Wait, you do have kids?
They're her kids from a previous relationship, but yeah, it turns out I like them. It's fine.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
But even when I was a little kid, I have a friend of mine, and he said it was partly a complaint about his parents. He always felt like he was going to be a dad, that he wanted to be a dad, and intrinsic to that was doing things differently than what his dad was doing. And I was like, you know what? I never felt any of those feelings. I never had a problem with the way my dad was parenting me. I never looked forward to having kids. I never felt like none of the things in that entire spectrum ever moved me. I would go, oh, I appreciate it. I understand why it exists, but actually I don't really care that much.
I see.
That's because I live beyond this flesh, Marshall.
That's clear. How do you make money, man?
That's a good question. I don't have very much.
What's going on with your manifesting?
Well, it varies. I like to pay as little attention to it as possible. I mean, I lived pretty off the grid for a while, and then I did yoga and meditation, the kind of obvious things. And then I was like, that's boring. I'm going to try random jobs that seem crazy. And then you do that for a while, but of course you get stuck in one of them, and then you start moving up the ranks in that. And then I moved out here to a different part of the world, and we ran a store for a while, but then COVID shut it down. And now we've got
what kind of store?
It sold local and ethically sourced clothing, mostly of bamboo, with a variety of different crystals and sacred sculptures. And there was a pretty sweet espresso bar there as well. And that's still a concept. We're doing it virtually a little bit, but we run it out of the market. And also
virtual espresso.
Yeah, virtual espresso. We had to drop the espresso part. It's just you just subtly absorb the prana of the espresso. That's the key. You pay double, but it's
weaponized espresso.
And then editing and writing and things online.
Odd jobs.
Yeah, odd jobs, advising people. That's sort of become a thing. But yeah, I could definitely, if anybody's watching this at all,
I could use some money.
Do something.
Please tip me. We'll put your PayPal link in the description.
Definitely.
So tell me about the elephant god behind you.
This one here. This guy.
Yeah.
Well, the old story is Shiva cut his head off and then felt bad, and so he gave him this elephant head. But you're hard-pressed not to notice it looks a little bit like a space helmet with a breathing tube. Now, when I was a little kid, I had dreams about an elephant that would melt through the walls in certain rooms. And then later I learned about the Hindu notion of Ganesh, and that sometimes he's referred to as the opener of the worlds or the opener of the ways. So of course I retroactively applied that to my childhood dreams. So I've always liked him, and he's kind of inoffensive, right? There's a lot.
He's inoffensive.
Choose a deity. Most of them are problematic, but this one's fine. Nobody's got a problem with Ganesh.
Nobody's got beef with Ganesh. How could you hate the elephant god?
You can't hate an elephant god.
Elephants are so cute.
They never forget.
No. So you've appropriated that.
Yep. It's mine now. I went over there and
colonized Hindu spirituality. Congrats. Took a trophy.
Thank you. I always felt very comfortable with Ganesh. Very not as my dominant mythic patron, but definitely up there.
No, what is your dominant mythic patron?
That's hard to tell. I think if I try to imagine time, I say to myself, hey, Layman, there's no past and future. There's no place for a past and a future to be. So that can't be. You can't think of a past and a future because you can't think of a place where they would be. This whole thing is the present. You're like, all right. But maybe there's multiple scales of the present. Maybe like a moment and an eon are somehow the same. They're just different scales of present momentness, right? So maybe there's like a phase of my life or an era or something, and these might be organic, different scales of now, of present moments at different scales, as if they were in this big resonating nest. And this thing's turning itself over all the time. Somehow everything everywhere hears about what just happened and also becomes a reasonable thing in the next moment. That's a super coordination operating at all these scales. There's no outside, but also it's built out of adjacency. So I've always just missed it. Every time you encounter the present moment, you just missed the present moment. What you always encounter is having just missed the present moment. So there's a not quiteness built into time. And so I'm here, I exist apparently, and I'm looking at all these nested scales of self-turning change, and they're all made of not quiteness, and not quite Just not quite on the other side of them is a hummingbird, a giant hummingbird. And its humming is like the Om sounds. And its eyes are alien and amazing, and it's iridescently attractive. And it's like the Vajra, the hyperdimensional Vajra beyond all time scales, turned into an animal. And it's staring, and it's sharp, and it's alien, and it's iridescent, and it's beautiful, and it's buzzing in this way that is the sound of the cognition of anything ever. So I'm going to go with hummingbird.
Okay. Dude, how do you even function? I mean, do you get up and you're like, I could have breakfast, but breakfast was an inherited construct from thousands of years, and it keeps me anchored in the past. But if I don't have breakfast, then I'm also a victim of starvation, which also is built into our genes, which, I mean, are these the kinds of like...
only when someone asks me a question. Otherwise, I just eat breakfast or not.
So if your girlfriend says, like, what should we have for breakfast? It becomes like this hyper philosophical dialectic.
I don't need that dialectic in order to not have breakfast, because I don't eat breakfast, and I try to not eat every second day, that kind of stuff. But I put things in my face.
Is that the whiskey? Is that your breakfast?
Yes, yeah. even if you're fasting, you gotta gluconate. You gotta hydrate. It's both in the whiskey.
You don't have to hydrate.
Debatable. I mean, at some point.
Have you seen the dry fasting? Check out the dry fasting Reddit.
It depends what you want your nervous system to do. Your nervous system behavior and your physical behavior are a little bit different. If you want to maximize brain functioning, it needs certain things that you don't necessarily need in order to thrive as an organism. But let's put that aside. I think there's an interesting relationship between the straightforwardness of experiential reality and the potential complexity with which it can be expressed. So for me, it's just like, hey, eating or not eating breakfast, that would be hilarious. But if I'm like, hey, why is that hilarious? And it's like, oh, because of this.
What the hell is that thing you just smacked?
Oh, I got this. I think
it looks like a tentacle.
It's very Lovecraft for me. It's got kind of, it's like a cactus from space. It's got these little pods and this little tongue. And the pods you can put your fingers in, which is grotesquely satisfying. It's kind of like a human cat toy. Just like
I see. I think I might have to give this video an X rating now.
Does that mean I can just start stripping as long as we're going to X?
You can start stripping, man.
All right. I'll go this far and we'll see how it goes.
Well, you can both do it.
Just more pink. Hey, right. Suave, you look like a magician.
I do, don't I?
You do.
That's my main archetype, I think.
It's a funny thing. I moved from this little island in the middle of nowhere to go into grade, I think 8. Right. And what would now be a small town, but to me it was a giant city because I was from nowhere. And so my school suddenly had like 1,500 times as many people in it. And one of the first things I had to do in this new school was play a role at the medieval fair. And the whole giant gymnasium was sectioned off and made into these tents, and you got to choose what you were going to be. And apparently I was Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, one of the original alchemists, also known as Paracelsus. I think that's the correspondence between those two names. Anyway, I had a tape deck playing theta wave induction soundtracks onto the table, and I would wear robes, and I would have conversations that were quasi-scientific and quasi-mystical with people who came up to my table. So that was me at 14. So I've always been gravitating pretty tightly around some kind of magus archetype of some kind.
Yeah.
Right? Not fully magical, not fully scientific, and also somehow performative.
Fascinating. What's the difference between a wizard and a magician?
Attitude.
Oh, yeah. Wizards have more of like a badass attitude.
Yeah, I think so. But there's also a matter of, one of the things that interests me a lot with um, systems of the manipulation of nonlinear correspondences is some people really like a system. They're like, oh, I have my grimoire. It explains to me how love goes with frogs, goes with the number 7. So I will be putting all that together, which is fair enough. It makes no sense. And because it makes no sense, you can access a different part of yourself. On the other hand, some people go, no, I'm more shamanic. I think love goes with Toblerones and pink fireworks and my left toe. So there's these different styles of doing basically the same thing, because they're basically trying to leverage the experience of nonlinear connectedness to increase being and have some kind of skewing effect on probabilities while feeling awesome. But you can do that in a personal way, a more systematic way. And I think wizards tend to be a little bit more systematic. They tend to act a little bit more like there's an ancient lore they should use. I got my spell book rather than I got to make it up for myself while I'm chanting and dancing around.
I hear you.
That's good. It almost seems like I'm making sense. Almost.
No, I think you did for a second there.
Just for a second.
It might have been the first time in this whole conversation.
All right, that'll be the tagline for the interview. Layman Pascal makes sense for a second. See if you can find when.
So we're approaching 2 hours here. What do you say? Should we wrap it up? Unless you want to talk about something
I don't
else.
want to use your whole day up, but I'm having fun.
What about drugs?
Anything you want to ask about, I'm happy to answer about. Or if you want to bring it to an end, I'm happy to try that too.
What are the merits of racial slurs?
The merits of racial slurs. I'm glad you asked. Two kinds of merits. I mean, you could say aesthetic. Some of them sound awesome. Right? There's two kinds of language. There's like the language we know to use for things that's appropriate in a moment. And there's the language that viscerally strikes us, given our heredity, as being kind of hilarious. Right? I always found Hebrew is so full of these weird little noises and things. You just like, is that one of the reasons why Jewish people have made such great stand-up comedians? Is because this history of relating differently to languages. Oy vey. You're like, oy vey, that's a beautiful. That's incredible. Like, I don't even know what you just did there. Oy vey. It's not language. It's not language. So there's an aesthetic dimension. And you could say, hey, this slur, it's really fun for me to say mulatto. That's a great word. I like mulatto. And we should have a way of describing ethnic hybridization. I'm in favor of it, but I like to say mulatto. On the other hand, there's a word like chink. And I'm like, it doesn't give me any pleasure to say chink. It's too sharp. It's jagged. Right. So just from a purely acoustic aesthetic point of view, you could judge them. So some of them would be more virtuous than others, but I'm coming back around to the virtue of using them as opposed to the virtue of which ones are better acoustically. And what I would say is the main virtue is, like we were saying earlier, to disembed yourself from the unconscious dominant social anxiety structure that's creating you in reality the way it is and sabotaging your deeper developmental potentials. So you have to do some things that might even feel uncomfortable to take a risk, to give yourself that distance between what you've heard is good and what you actually are. And one of the great ways today to take that risk is to throw a couple of those out. See if you're willing to try it in a space with someone else. Now, that's different. If you've got real racism going on in yourself, that's another problem. You need to seriously address that. And it's built into our networks, not just to our people. It's a real problem. But the problem isn't created by the words. The words are something you either cringe back from or lean into.
I gotcha. I'm impressed.
Not only that, he's in favor of racist terminology. This video is going on my resume. This is great.
Yeah, this wouldn't be my show if we didn't get racist as fuck here. What is your race?
Great question. Not totally sure. I'm told I have a lot of, and do these count as races? I don't know. There's a lot of English, a lot of Scottish, some French, a lot of Norwegian, and some Moorish. This is only what I've been told. And apparently some Neanderthal that's in all of us. Yeah. My father believes that our dark curly hair comes from Moors in Spain through his mother's side. And that's a fun image.
So you didn't test your DNA?
No, he did. And so did my mother, I think, but I haven't really followed up on any of that because it seems like such a small part of what I feel my ancestry to be.
I see.
I will tell you that I sexually prefer some races to others. I lived in Japan and I love the Japanese people, but they're not in my top 10. Obviously, mixed European is up there. But Samoans, I love Samoans. Persians, I love Persians. Don't feel the same thing about all of the Arab groups. Persians particularly. So there's a set, right? And I think everybody is built differently, but it's such an interesting and off-putting way to explore yourself these days that a lot of people don't put much thought into it. I've always been intrigued by the possibility that some genetic structural groups might resonate more than others. Some individuals might, for various reasons, resonate with different groups more, just like they resonate with some individuals more than others, right? You meet 10 people and on paper, they're exactly the same. And you're like, yeah, I like that one. The other ones, they all seem technically the same, but I like that one.
Yeah, so this is interesting. This is kind of bringing up thoughts about like racial homogeneity and how that supposedly leads to more like high trust societies or higher trust. Or there's something about diversity. I've read fairly recent research on how like the more either racially or culturally diverse a population, the lower trust it is.
I think there's a sweet spot. I've always been a big fan of racial hybridization. I love race mixing. It's one of my favorite things. I think if the Nazis had been pushing race mixing rather than race purity, we'd have a very different sense of them in retrospect. And I think that's a more likely way to build a superhuman than purity, because purity leads to fragility very fast.
Yeah.
Now, that said, I think there's a certain amount of homogeneity you need in order to feel comfortable expanding to embrace greater diversity, which is important to make you stronger, more robust, and smarter. Right? So you need more diversity. We all need more diversity because the very structure of diversity gives you access to other intelligence sources that you don't have. And if you can integrate multiple intelligence sources that feel different, you're going to have a smarter result than if you check with sources that feel the same. But that only really works if you can assimilate and integrate them. And you can only really assimilate and integrate them if you have the spare capacity and sense of comfort to do that. And a lot of that comes from an adequate amount of homogeneity. So we need to be the same enough to be more different, and we need to be more different. So we really need to be more the same so we can be more different, which we need to be.
Got it. Fuck.
Scarf back.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm out of things, man.
You're out of things. All right.
You got anything?
Got anything. You know, one of the things I've been making some notes for my Substack about white and black magic. Yeah, not
Ooh.
racial.
No, I get that.
But the question is, what do people mean when they've discussed white and black magic over the years?
Good question.
There's a superficial read on that, which is one is good and one is bad. One is for helping people and one is egotistical. But that's just more of the same nonsense at the social surface, right? Those polarizations are so superficial, they're barely worth considering. Now, in occult lore, at least in the West, there's these two forms of discourse where one is the white and black lodge, and the other is these white and black and also yellow schools of magic that Aleister Crowley writes about in Magic Without Tears, or Magic Without Tears. So one of these schools are styles of doing magic, and then these lodges are whether the magic in general helps everybody move forward along their pathways or is happy to sabotage other people's pathways to benefit ourselves temporarily. So in the schools of magic idea, there was this example of, hey, I have a cup with some dirt in it. How do I get it clean? Right? One group says, listen, just leave it alone and the dirt will sink to the bottom and then you'll have mostly clear water. Right? Crowley calls that the yellow school. It's sort of like a hands-off approach to reality. You're just going to surrender to it and everything's balanced. The black school says, listen, this is fucking shitty water. Smash this glass and move on. And the white school says, just pour in more clean water. And at first it's going to create a lot of turbulence, but pretty soon it'll all get pushed out of there and you'll have nothing but clean water. So there's these three styles of doing magic. One is more cynical about the world, wants to get free from it or control it. One is more indifferent to the world and wants to have a balanced, non-active stance. And one is more like, hey, we could make this way better. Let's get involved. Those are three styles. And then there's this sort of version of good bad that's a little deeper than the normal superficial monotheistic pop culture good bad. That's about, am I using the desire-like energies of my being and prana in a way that takes into account and also empowers all the desires of all the other beings cooperatively so they can integrate? Or am I just working on one and I don't care how much it distorts or compromises the desiring and higher self and activity and flow of all the other beings? And then those two are like, it's as if they are races of aliens trying to colonize this planet, because one of them would like to make it really shitty because that's what they eat. And one of them would like to make it super happy, full spectrum nonsense because that's what they eat. Anyway,
so which do you prefer?
I like the full spectrum nonsense where I take other people into account, but also make craziness happen.
How are you making craziness happen?
I just mean that the more different things you integrate, the more you make a richness that overflows yourself, and it overflows you in ways that will surprise you. So to me, it looks a bit like nonsense. Because if it's working, it's something I didn't anticipate.
True.
The exclamation mark and the question mark together.
I think that's the face that goes with it.
That's the asana of exclamation marks and question marks. Oh. I guess we're done.
I guess.
But let's do this again.
Yeah, I
would do this every day.
This is not amazing. At the end. This is to be continued.
All right. Layman Goes Crazy Part 1.
Yeah. No, I don't think we didn't quite go crazy yet.
All right.
But
Layman Goes Crazy Prologue. We haven't seen it yet. But wait till you get to chapter 1.
Yeah. I think you're somewhere in between 100% sane and 100% crazy. You're somewhere in the middle.
I had a teacher in high school who was my favorite teacher, Mike Stack. And I'd come in, I think at near the end of grade 12, I was doing some work for the student council and I was hanging out in the computer lab. And my favorite teacher came by and he said, "Oh, did anybody tell you what happened with your English exam?" I'm like, "No, what are you talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, some people from the provincial government came because there was a debate about whether to fail you or give you 100% on your final essay." I was like, "Yeah, that sounds about right." That's what I was going for, I think.
Yeah, either an A or an F. They're not certain. They probably use a different lettering system in Canada, like Q, X.
Yeah. It's Q, and then it's just an apostrophe, but it's pronounced in French, and then there's 2 beavers, and then just a smiley face.
QXZ.
This has been a lot of fun, Marshall. Thanks. I enjoy being with you.
What is Canada?
What is Canada? It's America Plus.
It's America's hat.
It's America's hat. Come on, have you solved most of your problems? You would look like us.
I don't know if there might be some people like Tom Warner might disagree with you.
Hey, a lot of people would disagree. There's people in this country that would disagree. In a way, I'm playing into the, what's the Canadian identity? It's patting yourself on the head for being slightly better than Americans.
Oh. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Some healthy delusion.
Yeah. That's why I'm hoping America can make a significant progressive leap in terms of economic structures, because that's the only thing that's going to force my country to get any better, is trying to stay a little bit ahead of the Americans.
Oh, right.
We're not going to go over that Norway, Sweden thing on our own. We need to be pushed from below by you guys.
All right. I'll try to do my part.
Yeah, good. Get that set up for me.
All right, man. Well, yeah, we'll have to do this again, and maybe next time we'll get completely naked.
Okay.
Bring in a little more
next time, let's
substances.
start naked and then slowly get dressed. It'll be like reverse strip poker.
Yeah. I'm down with that. Which you did. You put on a scarf.
Yeah, I'm going back up the other way now. Returning to life. Yeah, terrific. I guess I better turn this recording off, or I'm just going to keep talking and saying how wonderful I think you are.
Namaste.
Namaste, my friend.
And now I'm going to go.